Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. This is a meeting organized by the Venezuelan Solidarity Campaign. I am also from LASNET. I would like to welcome all of you. This is the first live program about Venezuela. The next one, just for you to put it in your piece of paper, notebook, is on the 23rd of March. So that's the next discussion, like today. But we also have another one before that, that is on the 2nd of March, organized by Joy and Helen, also part of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. So, all right, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Wurundjeri land for the Kulin Nation. I would like to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. I would like to leave clear that this land has never been ceded, was invaded. And before we start with this live program, just to pay my respect also to one of the Mapuche indigenous leader, Ruben Collillo, who was the husband of Macarena Valdez, an indigenous Mapuche leader who was killed in Chile defending her territory. Unfortunately, we received the news 2 days ago that he was killed in a car accident. So at the moment, that car accident is under investigation. So we want to pay our respect to this amazing activist and Mapuche leader who was, thanks to his activism, the truth came up about his wife being killed instead of killing herself as the police, make everyone believe. So it's unfortunate that he's not with us anymore, but I'm sure that his family and all of us will continue denouncing what's happening with the Mapuche people. So, all right, thank you for attending today, this first live program about Venezuela. And because it's just 1 hour, I would like to immediately, talk a little bit about the speakers we are going to have today. So we're going to have Rodrigo Acuña, the Dr. Rodrigo Acuña, and also Nino Pagliesi. Dr. Rodrigo Acuña is going to be our first speaker. Rodrigo Acuña is a teacher, he's an independent journalist, is a producer of the new documentary Venezuela, The Cause of Challenging an Empire, and who recently returned from Venezuela. So I would like to invite Rodrigo to join us, talk a little bit about this documentary, but at the same time, some information about Venezuela. And from there, feel free to ask questions. So welcome, Rodrigo.
Thank you very much for this invitation. As some of you know, I've been writing and lecturing publicly on Latin American politics for a very long time now. I think we're moving close to 15 years. And the reason why I commenced doing so was because of what I perceived to be a serious misinformation and misinterpretation and almost constantly ignoring Latin America in the mainstream media. We are told a little bit about there was an election in Venezuela, for example, or there may have been the arrest of a large drug dealer in Mexico, but we're never really provided with deeper context. What are the deeper wheels in motion as to these activities? And my own interest in Venezuela, going back to 2004, was to try and discover, was this president in Venezuela actually matching his rhetoric in terms of claiming, I'm talking about the late President Hugo Chavez, was he really attempting to reduce poverty in his country, or was it just simply rhetoric? Was there large mass movements behind his government, as he claimed, or again, was this simply political rhetoric. And I concluded quite quickly, having traveled to the country in 2005 for the first time, that the government was certainly doing a lot to reduce poverty. The government was certainly a government that was broadly backed by popular sectors that were attempting to challenge local elites and challenge the position of the United States on a regional basis. So I've been traveling back to Venezuela, and I've been writing on Venezuela for many years now. And I feel somewhat frustrated that many of the things that I see in Venezuela, many of the really interesting things, many of the great things that I see in Venezuela, I don't think I'm able to capture enough of the public's imagination, or enough people are informed by simply writing articles. So and as much as, you know, you may write the best article with statistics from the United Nations that the Venezuelan government has reduced illiteracy, for example, that the Venezuelan government has built over, I think it's the figures now, I think up to about 2.5 million homes. I'm happy to be, I've got that figure, the correct figure, in the documentary. And you can see construction all over Caracas and many parts of Venezuela that indicate that this is a government that, although it is certainly not perfect, has been a government that has been that has attempted to match its rhetoric through actions. So I teamed up with a young journalist called Nicholas Ford just over a year ago, and we talked about the idea of actually traveling to Venezuela and actually filming some of these projects, actually filming the complexity of the country, but trying to understand what is the real impact of US economic sanctions. Are there experts that can give us detailed information as to the economic war that the local business community has launched firstly against President Chavez and now against President Maduro? And we were certainly able to find many experts that were willing to do that. Now, I was there at the invitation of the Venezuelan government, which was kind enough to invite me as an electoral observer. And I said, but, you know, is it okay if I actually film film, some of the things that I see, interview people in order to make this documentary? And I was certainly loud. I did not have anyone interfere or tell me who I could talk to, who I couldn't talk to. So if you actually travel to Venezuela, a lot of the myths, a lot of the lies, a lot of the, I would say, rather malicious lies against the country and the incumbent government are sort of quickly dismantled. So, for example, I was there during the 29th election. Venezuela's presented in the mainstream media as a dictatorship. This is a country or a regime. They talk about a regime. The few, and I think we're talking about maybe 2 elections that the opposition has decided to abstain from, have been, that has taken place out of their own choosing. So it is a multi-party state. There are different parties that form the coalition that is in power. And there are different parties and even different coalitions that are part of the opposition. There are certainly sectors within the opposition that would like to violently overthrow the government, and they have been attempting to do that for a very long time. And there are certainly many powerful media actors that have been present, are still present in Venezuela, and have almost taken a position of not wanting to compromise with the Bolivarian revolution, as the movement likes to call itself, at all. Their only position has been, let's just, firstly, back in 2002, let's just overthrow President Hugo Chavez. And lately, in the last few years, let's just overthrow President Nicolás Maduro. Democratically elected, international observers. But again, all of these elements and the complexity of things are not reported in the mainstream media. And as someone who is, you know, I think it's fair to say an expert on the subject and has traveled to Venezuela on many occasions, it's quite annoying. It's quite infuriating to view these things and for it not to, for them not to be reported accurately. So that's what we have been trying to do in this documentary, which we've titled Venezuela, the Cost of Challenging an Empire, Venezuela, el costo de desafiar un imperio, because there is a cost. And the cost has been that in Latin America, and this is what we try to do in the documentary as well, we try to provide a sort of a broader historical narrative. And that narrative is that when progressive governments or leftist governments have come to power in Latin America, democratically elected, the local elites have almost always been completely unwilling to accept any reforms which will take power away from them. These governments have certainly never been perfect. These governments can be quite rightly critiqued on many fronts, and I think that's something that the Venezuelans can do. But what I think is undeniable and what is not reported in the mainstream press are the vicious attacks and the huge imbalance. There is a massive imbalance of power between, say, the Venezuelan government, in this case, and historically the Venezuelan Chamber of Commerce, the ones that participated in the 2002 coup d'etat, where they named the caretaker president, Pedro Carmona. He was the head of the Venezuelan Chamber of Commerce. They simply just, carried out a coup d'etat, and he became the new president. The funds that the United States has provided to the Venezuelan opposition in the past, we are talking about millions and millions of dollars that are a noticeable percentage that can influence and swing elections. So if we go back to Chile in the 1970s, the CIA essentially and the US State Department, et cetera, they essentially spent about $10 million to violently overthrow President Salvador Allende. Now, I think that, again, is an important element to discuss. So we've dedicated a section of the documentary to the political violence in Venezuela. And again, what we think is there's plenty of empirical evidence to support this, is that the overwhelming, when we're talking about violence in Venezuela, the overwhelming violence in Venezuela has come from the political right. It has come from actors that have been attempting to overthrow the Venezuelan government. So that's something important that we are trying to highlight in our documentary. I'm just going to check how I'm doing on time. I'm going to talk for another 2 or 3 minutes. Are we? And that'll take me to about the 15-minute mark.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes and a half.
4 minutes. Okay. Just let me know when I'm due then to wrap up. Now, I've talked about the sanctions and how we interviewed several experts, international experts and Venezuelan experts. I've talked about the violence in Venezuela, but I want to return to the achievements of the revolution, the things that indicate why there are so many lies against Venezuela, and what Venezuela proves, what the current government proves, is that again, despite its contradictions and its imperfection and its own errors, when you have a government that is backed by popular organizations, this backing sort of, there are moments where it is larger, there are moments where it is less so. But overall, there is a broader backing of the Venezuelan government by popular organizations. when these governments come to power, the things that they can achieve and do to reduce poverty, to create a fairer society, are in fact quite impressive. So, for example, in the latest Olympics, Venezuela won a noticeable number of medals. I remember having a debate with a Venezuelan several years ago and saying to him, you know, if I start counting the medals pre-revolution and post-revolution, I'm pretty sure that if the revolution hasn't achieved more gold medals and just medals, you know, gold, silver, and bronze at the Olympics, up until this point, it will quite soon catch up, because all governments in history that have invested in state-funded programs for their athletes, for broader access, are the ones that actually achieve quite high results. And Cuba's an excellent example of that. Well, sure enough, during the last Olympics, I actually went through and counted the medals, and now there have been more medals won under the Bolivarian Revolution than they have prior to, I think, almost 100 years of Venezuela participating at the Olympics. Now, that is an example, just one example of many, of what can be achieved when there is a government that decides that the interest of people should be placed ahead, as opposed to the interest of private corporations, in this case, oil companies, and of course, domestic elites. So I think there is so much to film, so much to tell about Venezuela, which is a very interesting country. It's a very interesting social experiment which is taking place. And that's what we're trying to do in our modest efforts. So I'll wrap things up here. If you're interested, you can visit our Kickstarter page. We have a Kickstarter page where we have a short teaser, a short video that you can see some of the footage that we've put together. And if you decide you find the project interesting, you can by all means support us. This is an independent project that the journalist Nicholas Ford and I are backing. So we are making an appeal to the public to support us because, as you would know, Venezuela in the mainstream media is, as I've said in this talk, not covered, or when it is, there are a considerable amount of lies and distortions presented about it, its government, and its people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. We had there the Dr. Rodrigo Acuña. We have 3 questions at the moment that came through the Facebook, but I forgot to mention, you know, you can send your question through the chat. But also to introduce, before my apologies, to Daniel Gaspari, you know, the head of the mission of Venezuela Embassy in Canberra, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So welcome, Daniela. As I said, my apologies. And the first question that we have at the moment through the Facebook, Rodrigo, is what message do you think it is important to give to the Latino Americans in Australia about Venezuela?
That they should visit Venezuela. They should read up on Venezuela by people who have traveled there, by people who have been looking at Venezuela for many years, and to try and appreciate the complexity. It's very easy to critique Venezuela and to accept the mainstream media lies and say, oh, there are so many Venezuelans that have arrived in Chile, or they've arrived in various parts of Latin America. But there is a war that has been engaged, that is taking place against the Venezuelan government in order for that government to fail. If that government were to be overthrown violently, or it were to be voted out of office, the opponents of the government would say, it proves that the experiment failed. We told you, we have been telling you this for a very long time. But what has been done to try and make this experiment, again, for all its contradictions, it is not perfect, but what has been done to try and make this experiment fail? The same can be said for the case of Cuba, over 60 years of one of the most brutal economic sanctions. And yet Cuba, again, for all its faults, for all its mistakes, it is not perfect. It is actually one of the safest societies in Latin America. I've been to Cuba many times. I would rather live in Havana than I would in many other parts of Latin America, because it is a safe and healthy society. It has many things which are extremely positive. And the same can be said for Venezuela. And when these experiments do fail and they're overthrown or their leaders are elected out of office, Chile, 1973, the war against the Sandinistas in the 1980s, the overthrow of the Panamanian leader Torrijos in the early 1980s and replaced by a CIA-backed thug called Manuel Noriega. When these governments are overthrown, again, the critics will say, we told you so, we told you so. But what have local elites and what has the United States been doing to try and undermine their efforts and overthrow them?
Thank you so much for that, Rodrigo. The second question is how we can improve the Australian solidarity with campaigns in support of Venezuela.
Informing yourselves, approaching solidarity organizations that are working with Venezuela. Daniel Gaspari, who is the charge d'affaires here, has been extremely approachable, extremely friendly. I don't think I've ever, not been able to call him and he's been too busy. He's an approachable man. He's a man that wants to communicate the message of his country and his people to the rest of the world. So if you approach Venezuelans and talk to them, you will actually be surprised at the reception that you get. So inform yourselves. Talk to these solidarity organizations, and when people like myself, and I'm not just saying this because it is our project, but when these projects come along, listen to them, talk to us. You would be surprised at the reception.
And the next question: do you think will be effective to raise a campaign requesting the Australian government to recognize Maduro as the president of Venezuela?
Sorry, I missed that last section. Could you repeat that, please?
Do you think that will be effective, to create a campaign requesting to the Australian government to recognize Maduro as the president of Venezuela?
Completely, of course, 100%, because he was democratically elected. If you genuinely believe in democracy, it means that you respect the will of the people. And the Maduro administration actually invited the United Nations, I think back in the last presidential elections, and there was a campaign, there was a battle within the United Nations for a team not to travel to Venezuela, if I remember correctly. But the Venezuelan government has always been quite open to international observers and to multi-party elections. So the opposition in Venezuela has participated in just about every election, and the two, maybe I think 3 times that they haven't, it has been strategic from their perspective because they believe they can violently overthrow the government. But there's never been anyone inside Venezuela locking up opposition leaders that haven't participated in violent attempted coups. They are there. They're there. I saw them with my own eyes. I saw them. I even talked to some of them for this documentary. So they are there. So certainly the Australian government should take a position of not aligning itself always on just about every single issue with the United States, and not actually being a constructive member of the international community in support of things like democracy, in support of creating global stability, peace, the reduction of poverty. The Australian government, the incumbent government and previous governments have unfortunately been following Washington's dictates for far too long, and it is a problem.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. We have, I'm going to leave the Facebook for a minute, and I'm going to go into the chat. I can see that there is 2 questions. One is, if people want to, no, that's not the one, sorry. That one, how people can support the documentary and what we can do from Melbourne. That's one question.
So if you, I'll put the link on the chat's website. But if you visit Kickstarter.com, you can actually see the trailer of the documentary, and that's where you can actually make a financial contribution if you would like to. The amount that we're asking for is extremely modest. I mean, this is I've just placed the link now. This is a passion. This is a project of passion because we genuinely believe that the story of Venezuela, its people, its social movements, its government needs to be told in a much more objective manner. And that's it's almost impossible to have a sensible diplomatic discussion about Venezuela, given the lies, the constant bombardment of lies against what its social movements and its governments, first under President Hugo Chavez and now under President Nicolas Maduro, have been attempting to do. And looking into the chat, we also have another question. Do you feel hopeful that the Bank of England will return Venezuela's money gold? I hope so, but I mean, what I would like is different to what may most likely occur. So again, just like the case of Julian Assange, these decisions have been made at a much higher level, and they are political. So if there is an international campaign of solidarity for Venezuela, in favor of Venezuela, and putting pressure and saying Venezuela's assets should be respected, then maybe a favorable outcome can occur. But the global financial institutions, which the United States has a predominant stake in, they generally always follow the dictates of the United States. So Venezuela is, according to the US, a case of a bad example, and it's not an example that other countries in Latin America should follow. So that's why precisely sanctions have reached the point where COVID vaccines were blocked into the country. I mean, that's you know, a serious violation of basic human rights for Venezuelans. The number of people that are suffering from diabetes, for example, that have passed away is now in the thousands. People in Venezuela are suffering, and the key driving force for this suffering is not the Venezuelan government, as the mainstream media would like us to believe. It's not the mismanagement of the economy. Again, they're not perfect, but when you manage to build, you know, I think it's over 2.5 million homes throughout 20 years, in the face of huge aggressions and hostility, then maybe your government is actually doing or trying to do something right. And that's precisely why domestic elites inside Venezuela and throughout Latin America and the United States have been hell-bent on trying to overthrow the government.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And I know that, you know, we have been asking question after question, but we have other question again through Facebook, and we're not, unfortunately, be able to read all of them, but because I'm going to prioritize for some of the questions that we have in the chat. So we have another question, and I will invite also Daniel Gaspari. If you feel that you can contribute, you know, to the answer to this question, Daniel, just feel free to do so. Yes. How are the sanctions hurting Venezuela now?
Well, thank you so much, all you, for organizing this event. I'm honored to be here with you today. Thank you, Marisol and Lucho. LASNET is a wonderful support for the people of Venezuela. And also, I need to tell you that Rodrigo has done an amazing job. He stays in my country for, I think, more than a month. He visits many places. As he mentioned, no limitation on his, capacity of moving around the country, talking to anybody and letting people know not only what people in Australia knows about Venezuela, he was letting Australians know what people in Venezuela think about what's happening in our country, which, as he mentioned, it's quite different from what the mass media shows, especially in this country. Regarding the question, Marisol, we are still being very impacted because of the sanctions to buy medicines and some food. Even to buy medicines is very difficult. To buy the vaccines is very difficult, and many people ask me why, and they are because of reasons that we all know. But the financial system in the world is controlled by the U.S. So to do a transfer, even to the most basic system of vaccinations, the vaccines, it goes through a bank in U.S. And that makes, things very difficult to pay. And then, of course, to get the vaccines, banks, they don't want to get sanctioned by U.S. And that happens also everywhere, actually in Australia too. But most of these impacts directly to medicines and food, especially the sanctions. Of course, there are other ways to impact, and we are not able to sell our oil, which is our first income. We are not able to buy replacement for our oil industry, which is also very important to produce oil. And there are other things which we can mention here that will take me a long time to enumerate them. But at this time, food and medicines are very, very difficult. There was a question, Marisol, if I give me one more minute there. Somebody asked regarding what you can do from Australia. And, this country is facing the 14th of May, is facing an election, which I think makes many politicians open a little bit more her ears and her eyes. I mean, his eyes in here. And that could help a lot if you can send letters to your parliamentaries, to representatives in your places. It's a pressure that it's not going to change the position, but it helps a lot, especially when you are in front of an election, close to election. And the elections this year, as I think the last one are very close, very, very, it's not clear now who's going to win. So I think that makes, them a little bit more concerned. And certainly that will help. I remember only a couple of months ago, our good friend and comrade Helen sent a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which she get a bad answer, by the way. It was not a good answer, by the way, completely out of reality. But this letter helps because that, press a lot on government and structure and bureaucracy, which is, the most important thing. Sometimes, this week I have some meetings with some Labour Party federal parliamentaries. And many of them, they are certainly, they agree with us. They agree with what Rodrigo just mentioned. But, of course, there are not all of them are those who has the possibility of making the decisions in parliament or in government. So I just mentioned this because I think it's very important if you can send letters or messages or you can talk to your local representative, that it won't make a big change, but it helps a lot. And that's very important. And the recognition of the President Maduro, I think that Australia, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Liberal Minister of Foreign Affairs, she sent a Twitter recognizing, the puppet of Waido at that time. That was the way they recognized, another government. But on the time, even after these 2.5 years, Australia is still like trying to understand what they did, And I'm not entitled to get a lot of opinions, political opinions, especially not on opening like this event. But I just tell you that it's very difficult for a country to recognize a government which is not in control of the state. And it happens in this case. It's not a policy from Australia, so we use that a lot in our favor. I'm still here. And my colleagues are still here. We represent the President Maduro. We are all politicians. I mean, we are political appointment diplomats. And if Australia don't recognize our president, for sure, we were not here, and we are here, which is good. So we have the ability of letting people know what's happening, to support, as we did, Rodrigo, to do this amazing job. We are, all very excited, and we want to, Rodrigo, to have this ready very soon. So I kindly request all of you who can help. We will can put, a little piece of heart on this and trying to help Rodrigo to have this finished very soon. Thank you all so much for this opportunity again. I think I'm not missing anybody, but LASNET I mentioned already. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. And Rodrigo, please, you keep, all our support. It will stay there, as from the beginning. Thanks for your words again. And thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Do you want to add something to the questions about the sanctions, or we move to the next one?
No, we can move on to the next question.
All right. So we have the next question is, what has happened to Waido, the traitor, as we do not hear anything about him? That's the question, yeah? I have read that Portugal have sent money. Oh, no, I think that's more related to the other one. But yeah, so they want to know what's going on with Waido.
He's, so I think, some 200 members that were originally part of his coalition have now basically informed him that they no longer want to be a part of it. I mean, they are in real chaos, because essentially there are about 3 different factions inside Venezuela that can be considered part of the opposition. But now there are sections of the opposition that have that participated in the last elections and are trying to distance themselves from leaders like Waido, because it's too obvious to most Venezuelans that these people have been funded by the United States. There's plenty of evidence for that. And number 2, their position of attempting to violently overthrow the Venezuelan government doesn't have widespread support. So when these demonstrations against the government take place, often there is even a lot of manipulation in terms of media footage, in terms of the number of people that come out in support of these demonstrations. So they have basically sort of fizzled out, and he's now in quite a bit of trouble. I mean, I think it should also be noted that with a lot of these figures, it's amazing. It's remarkable that the Venezuelan government has historically actually taken a position of let them fizzle themselves out, let them make all the racket and hoo-ha that they want to, when in many other countries, I mean, Waido in 2019 came out with a few members of the military that the opposition was able to buy off, and claimed that the Venezuelan military had finally rised up against the Venezuelan government. I mean, if a section of the Australian military and say 3 or 4 members of parliament came out and declared that they were essentially carrying out a coup d'etat, I don't think these politicians here, those politicians here in Australia would still be walking free. So there's a lot of people inside Chavismo that have claimed that the government, in fact, should take a much harsher position against them. Of course, were the government to do that, then that would confirm the mainstream media lies and narrative that Venezuela is a dictatorship. It is placing political opponents in prison. They're not going to give you the information. These political opponents have been attempting to carry out violent US-backed coup d'etats. That crucial bit of information always goes missing.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And the time is passing. Don't forget that we have our next speaker, Nino Pagliesi. But there is I can see in the chat that we have 2 we have two people who want to ask questions, so I'm not sure you still want to ask a question, Lily, directly, and also we have Rolo. If you please, we have 5 minutes to do this, if you can ask the question, and Rodrigo will have
Marisol, I just wanted to, because I read,
before we move into Nino.
Yeah, I read that Portugal has also withheld money from Venezuela. So I want to know if that's true. I read that last year.
There are multiple countries that have participated in the sanctions and have withheld money. So the United States never acts alone against these countries like Cuba. It has almost without questioning support from the European Union. I mean, the way that the European Union, not all of it, but most of it, or important players, have acted towards Venezuela is the same, is a similar pattern to the way that they acted against the government of Salvador Allende in the 1970s. The United States declares you an international pariah. Its allies will almost automatically, without exception, or if there are, they're in the minority, going to participate against that government in terms of sanctions.
I would like to just add something to the question of Lily. Novo Banco of Portugal, that's what you wrote, they steal $1,700 million from Venezuelans, which were deposited in this bank in order to buy the food and medicines. That was what I mentioned before. So because they said they don't recognize the government, this government, the government of Maduro don't have the ability to, to move this money. So the money has been kidnapped on the bank, and that's for more than 3 years. I think I answered her question.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And Rolo, I can see, do you want to ask the question or you want me to read the question, Rolo? All right, I will read the question. My question is about how the Venezuelan government is controlling domestic violence. That's the question from Rolo.
The Venezuela.
Sorry, but just my communication was cut off for 1 second. Okay. My question was related to something that is always concerned in any process of whatever it is revolutionary, and my question is for exactly if you, Rodrigo, you saw improvement in that kind of sense of domestic violence is a pandemic like a COVID, and obviously is always a matter of that any revolutionary had to be concerned and aware of. Do you see any things that have improved in that sort of sense?
The Venezuelan economy has actually been improving in the last several months. We're almost going on to about a year now that the economy has been improving because of the relations between Venezuela and Iran. There is an exchange program there for oil, which has allowed Venezuelans to increase their export of oils and obtain replacements for their oil industry. So that allows them to break the sanctions. In terms of violence, I actually found Caracas to be probably one of the much safer this time around than probably all of the other visits that I've taken there. And one of the things that there are so many things that aren't mentioned, but the Venezuelan government has been, the problems of underdevelopment are not going to be solved in 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years. The problem of violence is actually very interesting. prior to President Hugo Chavez taking office, Venezuela had something like almost 130 different police forces. These police forces had different levels of training, different levels of corruption, different levels of payment, different levels of professionalism. The government created what's called the Policía Nacional Bolivariana, if I remember correctly, and they have undergone training to modernize them, create a much more professional force, teach them about human rights. They're certainly not perfect, but they have been attempting to create a much more professional police force than anything that had previously taken place under the former governments. Again, this is another example of when the Venezuelan government does something right or does something that most sensible people would say, actually, that's a pretty good idea. Well done. How can we help you? No media coverage, no credit. So we're always told about, oh, the barrios, and they're so violent, and there's this and that. Yeah, the barrios have been, there have been problems there for decades, for 50 years, for 70 years. And that's the case all over Latin America. But find a government that has tried to implement programs to actually seriously reduce the violence, and you won't find many. And the ones that you find are generally classified by the United States as to be regimes, dictatorships, corrupt, etc., etc.
Thank you so much.
So you're talking about the domestic violence. Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. And now, as I said, I would like to thank you so much, Dr. Rodrigo Acuña, for your participation and agree to be part of this conversation. I will invite you to stay with us because we're going to put a short video from Nino Pugliese, who is from the Frente Hugo Chávez de Solidaridad in Canada. And he's going to specifically talk about the campaign to free Alex Saab. And yeah, so I will invite you, all of you, to stay. And if we have some extra minutes at the end, I'm sure Rodrigo or Daniel will be able to answer your questions. All right, we'll pass it on to you, Lucho.
Greetings to all from Canada. My name is Nino Pugliese. I speak on behalf of the Frente Hugo Chávez para la Defensa de los Pueblos in Canada. To speak about Alex Saab's case could take hours. So many have been the abuses and violations against him by the United States. He has been kidnapped for 619 days today. That is why I want to say in the most explicit and intentional way that the imperial government of the United States has once again committed abuses, criminal actions, and political interference, which are not only directed at a citizen, Alex Saab, but tries to intimidate Venezuela, our Patria Grande, and other nations of the world and international institutions. The criminal kidnapping of the Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab cannot be interpreted in any other way. The kidnapping of Alex Saab today is a symbol. His kidnapping represents the contravention by the United States of any convention or agreement or international institution such as the United Nations Charter, the Vienna Convention, conventions on human rights, etc. When a government abrogates, not accidentally, but very deliberately, its commitments as a member of the world community, then it becomes a global outlaw. It isolates itself and deserves to be isolated. Alex Saab was appointed special envoy with a diplomatic passport from the Bolivarian government of Venezuela, a sovereign country and a member of the United Nations, in April 2018. That is a position that was necessary for Alex Saab to be able to negotiate as our representative to bring to Venezuela food, medicine, and other needed supplies that the U.S. and other nations have been preventing with unilateral, illegal, coercive measures since 2015. He has been succeeding in his mission and has allowed the delivery of food baskets to more than 7 million families. But the empire has not been able to tolerate that Venezuelans did not go hungry. When the plane he was traveling on made a refueling stop in the small archipelago country of Cabo Verde near the coast of West Africa on June 12, 2020, Alex Saab was taken from the plane, and it was no use having a diplomatic passport protected by diplomatic immunity in accordance with the Vienna Convention of 1961. That was the first kidnapping of Alex Saab. There were lots of illegal irregularities with erroneous or false documents, all poorly orchestrated by the Trump administration, which requested that Alex Saab be extradited to the U.S., despite the fact that Cabo Verde and the U.S. have no extradition agreement. Alex Saab was held captive in Cabo Verde for almost 500 days. 500 days in which he suffered physical and psychological torture and mistreatment, as he himself recounted in a letter from his prison. He wrote, "I was physically and psychologically tortured by the United States and Cabo Verde with the consent of the Donald Trump government and members of the government of Cabo Verde." Despite legal clarity that Alex Saab was kidnapped as a diplomat, the Cape Verdean government allowed him to be kidnapped a second time by the United States on October 16, 2021, and locked up in a Miami prison. Cabo Verde literally sold out for a $400 million investment that the U.S. promised its corrupt leaders. The only U.S. government false charge against Alex Saab is conspiracy of money laundering. Other 7 charges were dismissed for the simple reason that they were just lies to put pressure on Cabo Verde. The kidnapping of Alex Saab is politically motivated. Alex Saab has not committed any crime. On the contrary, he has tried to mitigate a crime committed by the U.S. and its so-called sanctions that are killing millions of innocent people in Venezuela. For us as activists, Alex Saab is unifying force of our anti-imperialist struggle in his defense and in defense of the Bolivarian Revolution. Alex Saab makes a very strong call to us to accuse the United States government for its abuses, its crimes, and its interference against the sovereignty of nations. The United States believes it can kidnap a diplomat by breaking any international convention. We strongly reject U.S. imperialism. I quote Alex Saab's words from his letter. "I want to make it clear that I have nothing to collaborate with United States, that I have not committed any crimes in the United States or in any other country, that I will not lie to benefit the United States against President Nicolas Maduro and his government. The United States thinks it's going to shut up Alex Saab in his prison, but it's not going to be able to do so. We will be the voice of Alex Saab, and we will continue to shout, "Freedom for Alex Saab! Free Alex Saab!"
And there we had Nino Pagliesi from the Frente Hugo Chávez de Solidaridad in Canada. And yeah, what they did last week, they launched the international campaign in support of Alex Saab. So, and yeah, it's unfortunate that because of the time difference, you know, he was unable to be here and to answer questions. But again, we already are at 7 p.m., but I will probably give to ourselves 5 more minutes before we finish. So in case you, Rodrigo, or Danielle has any contribution before we finish today.
I would just like to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Daniel for his comments, the support that the Venezuelan government gave Nick and myself for traveling to Venezuela and make this documentary, and to Nino and his campaign, an important campaign to free Alex Saab. So thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Daniel.
Just thanks. Thank you. That's all what I can say. Thank you again. There's not much words I can add to your conversation, what you did, what you said. And again, anything, any event regarding Venezuela, please let me know. I'm happy to support it. Again, please, if we can help Rodrigo to finish his work, that would be an amazing opportunity to have in English from an impartial, actor, different, a different perspective of what happened in my country, which is not what you see here, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Just to remind everyone that the next activity is going to be on the 2nd of March, that you can we can send it to all of you, and it's going to be available. But also the discussion like today, where we can talk a little bit more and have a speaker, is going to be on the 23rd of March. And I'm going to pass it on to Lucho. We have a 1 minute, Lucho, announcement.
Yeah, just to, as I said, thank you very much, everyone, to be here, and Rodrigo, Daniel. And also, we'd like to announce that on the 2nd of March, we want to have a next podcast. The Venezuelan Campaign, we start different event online every fortnight. We want to have a podcast, and then we want to have a live program. So every fortnight. The next one is on the 2nd of March. It's going to be a podcast, and the following fortnight later, on the 23rd, we have another live podcast where we're going to talk about the comunas, the communal movement in Venezuela. That's going to be on the 23rd of March. So we're going to have people from Venezuela also speaking about it. We hope they can grab a little bit earlier, but we will try. We'll try. Don't worry. And also that the LASNET is involved in the Venezuelan Campaign. We want to clarify that also, that because he is comrade from the Venezuelan Campaign that been given a lot of support and effort in putting the war of Venezuela around, in unions, in politicians, etc. And also that some campaign we are running here from Melbourne. One of those is we are trying to support a community in Venezuela in the area of Sabana de Chavez. It's called the area. We are supporting the community there to build childcare. So Also, we are some commitment from the last visit to support the hospital there with the medical equipment and also medicine. We are still, because pandemic is stopping to doing this. But also, we'd like to also invite to people if we are interested. We are having organizing meeting or meeting for the year. It's going to be on the March 13, 1 p.m. We're going to have it in person, but people who want to join us on the 13th of March, we're going to also be able to join us online. So as I said again, 13th of March, we have the Venezuelan Security Campaign annual meeting, or where we're going to decide the campaigns or how we're going to develop all the projects we have at the moment. So as again, thank you very much, and that's it for me.
All right, thank you so much, Lucio. I will say that will be very important, for all the groups who support Venezuela to think about what Daniel said before, how important will be to start from now on approaching our parliamentarians, your local parliamentarian, and talk about Venezuela, ask them, about the sanctions, to talk about all what is happening at the moment in Venezuela and see what we can do. And I will say goodbye. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to join us today. And sorry. All right. And I cannot see Jesus, unfortunately. So Jesus, do you want to say something?
His microphone is on mute.
Jesús, tienes tu micrófono apagado.
Micrófono.
No te oímos.
Now, there you are.
Que me disculpen que me salga un poquito del orden, pero les iba a pedir que me den un minutico para enterarlos brevemente de la situación en Colombia, que por cierto lo que está aconteciendo en estos momentos en Colombia, ese gobierno fascista de Duque le está echando toda la responsabilidad a Venezuela.
Ya, es lo mismo que pasa en Chile, Jesús.
Sí, me da un minuto.
Sí, por favor.
Ok, bueno.
¿Español o inglés, Jesús?
Pues en español, muy breve.
¿Quieres que lo traduzcamos al inglés, Jesús?
Ok. En lo transcurrido apenas del 2022, tenemos 25 líderes sociales asesinados.
Can you help us, Mary?
Tenemos 19 masacres con 91 víctimas.
Perdona, yo entonces digo que hasta ahora, up till now in 2022, we've had 25 social leaders killed in Colombia.
Exacto.
19 killings. ¿Y 91 qué decías?
Y 91 víctimas de esas masacres.
91 victims of the massacres that have been conducted.
Y esto es a corte de este febrero del 2022.
That's since February of 2022.
Lo que quiero resaltar es que en esa campaña que tienen contra Venezuela, obviamente orquestada del Pentágono, la responsabilidad de toda esta crisis humanitaria en Colombia, tienen el cinismo de decir que se está organizando desde Venezuela.
The Pentagon is so cynical that they are saying that the whole crisis, the humanitarian crisis going on in Colombia, is totally the responsibility of Venezuela. That's part of their campaign against Venezuela.
Okay. El otro punto, porque ahí quiero ser muy breve, es que tenemos elecciones legislativas el 13 de marzo para elegir nuevo Congreso que se compone de Senado y Cámara. 13 de marzo.
So on the 13th of March, there are congressional elections in Colombia, and both houses are up for election.
Bueno, Creemos que el pueblo colombiano esta vez va a elegir senadores y representantes realmente de los candidatos que tiene la izquierda y sectores democráticos y progresistas a través de lo que denominamos el pacto histórico que encabeza Gustavo Petro.
We want Colombian people to elect progressive people, senators, representatives who are progressive candidates, and to support the historic pact led by Gustavo Petro.
Y entonces en el marco de esto es que hay toda una campaña de terrorismo de Estado a ver cómo le infunden miedo a la población para que efectivamente no asista a las urnas a votar por los candidatos del pacto histórico. Lo que llamó la atención es que lo que falta de aquí al 13 de marzo, con toda seguridad, la violencia, la criminalidad contra la población y en especial contra los líderes se va a fortalecer de parte de esa oligarquía.
There's an absolute campaign of terror, state terror, and really intimidating and terrifying people to influence their voting in order that they won't vote for this historic pact led by Petro. And so on the 13th of March, we fear that there will be violence. We know that there'll be all kinds of attacks against people and attacks against the progressive leaders who should be elected.
Okay. En el mes de mayo, bueno, esto es lo de marzo. 13 de marzo las elecciones. En el mes de mayo son las elecciones presidenciales, que ya cumple los 4 años títere de Duque, y digo títere porque es el títere de Álvaro Uribe, o sea, del uribismo, Iván Duque. Entonces ya termina y hay elecciones presidenciales. El candidato más opcionado, y según incluso las propias encuestas, es Gustavo Petro, quien incluso va a asistir a la posesión, fue invitado a la posesión el 11 de marzo a Chile, a la posesión de Boris como presidente de esta nación.
So the 12th, sorry, turned off my mic. The 13th of March are the elections coming up, but then a presidential election will be in May. And these puppets who are currently in power, Iván Duque, and who's a puppet of Álvaro Uribe, they've been there for 4 years and their period ends, and it's Gustavo Petro is the candidate for president, and he is the best candidate who could possibly be elected as a progressive person, and he was even invited to the inauguration in Chile as a representative of Colombia.
Ok, esa es la información que les dije que iba a ser muy breve. Abrazos y muchas gracias a los compañeros venezolanos que nos entregaron el informe actual de lo que acontece en nuestra hermana República de Venezuela. Y termino diciendo, llamando la atención que estemos muy atentos porque se va a recrudecer la violencia en Colombia en este periodo hasta el 13 de marzo, las elecciones legislativas y a mayo las elecciones presidenciales. Reitero, muchas gracias y abrazos para todos y todas.
Thanks very much for allowing me and to allowing me to add this to the excellent discussions about the sister Republic of Venezuela. And yes, I just wanted to reiterate that there will be violence in Colombia against these progressive people, both in the March and May elections. And thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and I will see you in the next one. So,
Thank you.
Chao, everyone. Gracias, Rodrigo. Gracias a todos.
Gracias.
Un abrazo a todos. Muchas gracias.
Nos estamos viendo. Gracias, Daniel. Buenas, Jesús.
Ok.
Chao.
Gracias. Chao. Chao.
Chao.